Okay, next one is Tunng presents Dead Club by the band Tunng, obviously. Um, and this came out on the 6th of November. It's 12 tracks and roughly an hour long. Um, so Tunng, spelled Tunng, not like the oral appendage. They're a sort of indie folk band or folktronica band, as I've seen them referred to due to their extensive use of electronic sounds and samples within their music. The band consists of founders Mike Lindsay and Sam Genders, backed up by Ashley Bates, Phil Winter, Becky Jacobs, and Martin Smith. So as a whole, it's a large band. For those of you who have listened to our top 20 albums of all time, then you may remember that the band's 2010 album And Then We Saw Land featured on my list at number 18. So you should definitely go and check that out if you want to know my thoughts on that album. But Tunng typically write sort of wistful indie acoustic songs loaded with inventive lyrics, bolstered by the vocals and harmonies of Mike Lindsay and Becky Jacobs. The electronics woven into the songs bring a uniqueness to their sound, and it often makes for a weird sense of danceability to their music. So, as much as I love And Then We Saw Land, I haven't really listened to that much of the other albums by the band. I've got Good Arrows, which I think came out in 2007. But other than that, I've only really listened to Lindsay's side project called Cheek Mountain Thief. I've got one of their albums, which is all right. But other than And Then We Saw Land, Good Arrows, and then this album, I haven't really listened to that much of their output. What's your exposure to Tunng generally?
I have actively avoided them for some reason. I have no idea why. I think I got it into my head that they were some sort of metal band. So when people have tried to speak to me about them before, I've just switched off completely. Um, so I really didn't know what to expect from listening to this album, and I have to admit I was bowled over. Really enjoyed it. I've described it here as an evocative, thoughtful, and introspective exploration into the concept of death, dying, and all the thoughts and sentiments therein. Does that work
Okay,
for a sentence?
very deep.
And it's a very deep album.
So,
Um, I suppose kind of to go into a bit more detail about, I suppose, the album's kind of formation. Um, Mike Lindsay of the band, who've kind of mentioned there, has described it variously as being not just a record, it's a discussion, it's a podcast series, it's poetry, it's short stories that touch upon what their Bandcamp website describes as near untouchable subjects, i.e., grief, loss, the act of dying, where we go and what's left behind. And I think, to be honest, that's a pretty apt description. Um, just to give you a bit more background, again, according to their Bandcamp website rather, during the recording of their sixth album in 2018, lyricist Sam Genders found a novel entitled "Grief is a Thing with Feathers" by Max Porter, and was struck by how powerful it was, to the point where the book was then passed around the rest of the band members. The six members then went on to discuss the topic at length, and the project started to grow in arms and legs. They got Max Porter, the author of the aforementioned book, involved, and he subsequently wrote two new pieces for the album. Also cultivated a podcast series, which is produced by the bands Becky Jacobs and Sam Genders, in which they speak to philosophers, scientists, frontline workers, and more. And snippets of these kind of feature throughout the course of the album, including a wee guest spot from magician and mentalist Derren Brown on one of the album's later tracks.
have you listened to any of the podcast?
I haven't, no.
No,
Have you?
neither have I. I didn't know it existed until today when I was writing my notes. I think it would
I,
be interesting.
well, I mean, I don't know actually, because I listen to the Adam Buxton podcast fairly regularly, and he goes on. So he lost his mum and dad fairly recently in the grand scheme of things, like within the last few years.
Okay.
And I think he's been on a podcast called the Grief Cast, I want to say. But I don't know if this is the same thing or not. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it's called. I just know there's like an 8-part um, series where they discuss. It's probably unlikely that it's the same podcast because I think it's specifically about the album,
Right.
how it
Okay.
was conceptualized, um, and that kind of thing.
See, I wasn't too sure what to like. I just went into it blind,
Yeah.
basically. It's quite clearly a concept album, though, as we said. But yeah, when I first listened to, so like on my first listen um, to the opening track, "Eating the Dead," I was reminded of Pink Floyd's "The Greatest Gig in the Sky" off their Dark Side of the Moon album. Um, just for that wee kind of voice sample that you get in the Pink Floyd song, where there's a guy kind of talking about death and dying, and he can be heard saying something along the lines of, "I'm not frightened of death," or "I'm not frightened of dying. Any time will do. Why should I be frightened? You have to go sometime." And I thought the song was maybe like just in that moment, I thought the song was maybe a homage to that in some way, even though the songs are quite different. But as I since found out, like I said, the whole album is of course an exploration of that concept, and the song is in fact a nod to the Wari people or Vari people, is how you pronounce it, spelled Wari, also known as the Paca Nova from Brazil, whom reportedly eat their dead, or previously ate their dead. From what I've read, this ritual of eating your deceased relatives is no longer practiced. However, in the past, it was commonplace and was considered to be done out of the utmost respect for the person. The idea was that by consuming the flesh of the deceased, their spirit would live on the bodies of their relatives rather than wandering the forest or jungle on their own.
Okay. I found a similar culture in Paraguay called the Guayaki or Guayaki, and
Right.
they had a similar they had a similar thing of treating the dead and preparing it, and then the whole tribe would eat the body, except for the family's loved ones, and
Well, I think it's the same with the Wari people. So, like, maybe aunts and uncles, but like that person's wife or equivalent of like their most kind of closest relatives wouldn't get involved
yeah.
in the practice.
And I mean the song is like about ritualistically devouring a body and the memories like of a dead individual. It's like
Yeah.
lay you on my kitchen table, cut you open tenderly, and then it goes on to like talk about eating their memories and all sorts of weird stuff like that. Um it's quite cool.
It's different, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like it's
very different.
um I liked it. Yeah, I liked it quite a lot. Um and there's a lot of that stuff throughout the course of the album. So like similarly track number 3, SDC, which stands for Swedish Death Cleaning,
Yeah,
touch on the practice of, wait for it, I'm going to try and pronounce this, Dostanting. I think that's a pretty good
I think that's pretty
pronunciation.
good. Yeah.
Which is a simple living ethic and aesthetic which focuses on not burdening those that survive you with your earthly possessions. The song, or at least the song's chorus, is oddly upbeat, given the song's content, and includes kind of lush vocal harmonies, which is accompanied by some kind of gentle synth and ethereal kind of soundscapes that kind of vamp over the top of them. So yeah, the kind of the idea of kind of Swedish death cleaning sounds like a pretty good idea. I mean, at the end of the day, the last thing you want is for your relatives to discover all your skeletons in the cupboard, let alone your frankly excessive dildo collection.
I like that because I think a song about sorry, an album that's concept is about death could become a really
Quite
difficult
macabre roast, yeah.
and like um, depressing listen, but they've got like they throw in kind of twinges of humor and it makes it a really kind of kind of fun, but like really engrossing and kind of. I mean, it's an eye opener because obviously we talked about the concept of eating the dead, and then this concept of sort of purging your life's your collection of trinkets that you've got over your life to kind of declutter and you know lessen the emotional impact of your passing on your loved ones, I suppose, to a certain extent, because I suppose it can be. I think that process of going through somebody's stuff and kind of all the memories coming flooding back is a difficult thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so there's that sort of stuff on the album. I really like the song that's sandwiched between those two tracks, "Death Is a New Sex," which is
Oh yeah,
I kind of mentioned earlier that the band have got a way of making kind of indie acoustic songs almost danceable, and I think "Death Is a New Sex" is a really good example of that. It's got a kind of apocalyptic electronic bass thump that opens the song out, and it's got like that's accompanied by this quite mournful guitar lick, but the chorus is really quite upbeat. Death, which goes, "Death is a new sex. Everybody's talking about it. Death is a new sex, coming soon to fuck us all."
yeah.
And again, there's that sort of tongue in cheek humour, and just a really memorable, catchy chorus. And it ends again on that kind of that apocalyptic electronic comes back to the forefront. I think it kind of picks the pace up after this kind of the slowness of eating the dead, and it kind of yeah, like I said, it picks the pace up a bit and draws you into the album a bit further after that kind of intriguing opener. And they do that a lot, just kind of masterfully melding all these different electronics and instruments and vocals. I mean, Three Birds is probably the most kind of familiar Tunng sounding song.
Right. Okay.
To me, it's got this kind of stripped back opening with a kind of it's quite a familiar violin kind of plucking sound that I've heard them do before, which then combines with kind of arpeggio guitar and really soothing, harmonizing vocals, and the the lyrics of that song are delivered in almost like a children's nursery rhyme.
That's how I've described it, like a kind of macabre kind of
Yeah,
nursery rhyme.
and just the way they combine all these elements together, like it's really impressive.
It's interesting because like the first time I listened to this album, I was actually walking around Eglinton Park at the time because we've recently had quite a lot of rain. It's been flooded, like a lot of it's flooded. Like you can't use a lot of the tracks. And it just seemed so apt at the time because the opening lines of Three Birds is three boys lost in the flood, three families torn apart, three stars over the wood, three birds beneath the stars. So yeah, it was quite apt as I was trekking about there. But yeah, there's I mean that song kind of reminded me a bit of the Decemberists, to be honest, which I suppose is another kind of indie, kind of folk or alt indie kind of band. Um, I was also reminded a bit of kind of Belle and Sebastian as well,
Yeah. Okay.
on the likes of A Million Colours and Carry You, which I really liked. I really like Carry You. It kind of hit a chord with me. It's about kind of reminiscing and remembering people who've passed away and how our memories of them are triggered by simple things such as in a fall of snow and an open wound, in a summer coat and an angry word and a burst of hope on the telephone, at the water's edge and so on, and how we carry them with us wherever we go. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought Last Day as well. That was interesting. Kind of use a sample of someone taking a kind of sharp intake of breath to kind of keep time throughout the course of the song, which I thought was quite an interesting thing. It's got this kind of interesting kind of rattly bit in there as well. The vocal harmonies are really good. I wasn't too sure about the lyrical content. Like, is it about an outer body experience?
No, I think it's literally about experiencing your final day on Earth.
Right.
Because
So
there's
I
the
thought
sort
that
of section.
because, like, I thought that because, like, towards the end of the song, it kind of talks about. I think there's this kind of modulated or computerized electronic voice kind of will shout something like cat or tree, like this could be the last tree of your life, this could be the last chair of your life. But at the start of the song, it talks about how this woman can see her severed, like, toes, I think. Like,
Yeah, I don't know. They
yeah,
could be a
I don't
combination
know.
of. It's probably not as simple as it's just a commentary on somebody's last day. There probably is some kind of existential element to it, or out of body experience, or whatnot. I just think that sample of using that intake of breath is a really clever kind of thing, because it sort of forms a point on the drum beat.
Yeah.
And it's all like when you consider the last day, it's it's all it lists kind of all these last things you do on Earth, and then that intake of breath. It's like your last
That could
intake
be
of
a
breath
last.
as well. It's quite it's a very, like you say, a very interesting concept.
I remember feeling a wee bit disappointed that the woman. So there's a kind of voice clip later on, maybe kind of halfway through the song, and I kind of felt as if she was going to start rapping for some reason, and I was quite disappointed that she didn't. I don't know if this is maybe one of the other kind of philosophers or whatever that maybe kind of features in the podcast or whatever, but yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know why. For some reason, I thought that she was going to go into this kind of monotonous kind of rap, and I was like, ah.
All right. Well, note to tongue. Get your philosophers to
I
rap.
want more philosophers rapping, mate.
Yeah,
That's all
absolutely.
I'm asking for.
But there's that's all on a few tracks on the album. There are clips of um sort of nameless philosophers or whatever. There's a clip of Devin Brown, who you mentioned was on the podcast. He features on,
Fatally human?
is it yeah, Fatally Human. And then you were talking about Max Porter, the author of that book, which I forget the name of. But he wrote, and I believe he delivers the spoken word on
Oh, I
Man
see.
and on Women. And I think it's him. I couldn't find anything to back that up other than I went and listened to a clip of him in an interview on YouTube, and I thought, yeah, that sounds like him. But
I
it
quite
might
enjoyed
not
those two
necessarily.
as well. Like, I kind of, for some reason, it reminded me a wee bit of Scroopius Pip.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. Um, I did think that maybe kind of Fatally Human would be the better song to end the album. However, saying that, I can understand why they chose Women. Because in Fatally Human, I think it starts with a clip of Darren Brown where he kind of talks about how um, he's kind of musing about how he thinks that death or the end of life should ideally be like the end of a book or a movie, that there's some sort of resolution or finish and that it kind of comes to an end. And obviously in Women they kind of talk about it's kind of written from the perspective of an archaeologist, I
Yeah, yeah,
think,
absolutely.
kind of discovering a kind of Viking woman, and what her life was like. And I suppose the archaeologist is reading this woman's body like a book. Kind of talks about how she lived, how her husband Eric came over to England and is now buried 5 metres beneath Lidl's car park in Essex. But then he
Joined
kind of
the
lives
Dead Club
on.
in England.
He joined the Dead Club in England, yeah. But then how he kind of lives on as well. Like he kind of lives on in terms of like his genetics. Like there's parts of Eric and Jacob. I think the kind of character's name's Jacob, who's kind of sitting smoking fags somewhere on the street, and how it also says that part of Eric is now into the black water, and now he's fallen as a part of rain as her body kind of disintegrates and stuff. I thought it was quite good.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool. It's a really good ending track, definitely. And I hadn't really connected that part of Fatally Human with women in terms of kind of reading the person's past like a book. But I think that's um, quite an astute point to make. I think while we were talking about women, like there's obviously Man is the companion track to that because it's both the same. They're both written by the same. Well, the spoken word at least is written by the same person and delivered by the same person, and that is kind of you've got to draw comparisons with LYR's Calling the Crash Team on these tracks, and I mean in other parts of the album as well, because the delivery of the vocals by Tunng's main vocalists is often almost spoken word in the way it's delivered. I think they play to their strengths because I don't think either of them are like amazing singers. I think they know. I think they tend to sing in a certain way and play to their strengths, which is really effective. But on Man and Woman, it is full on spoken word with kind of these instrumental soundscapes that it's delivered over, and yeah, it's hard not to compare that to LYR, and in particular, like even some of the turns of phrase that are used on Man and can be compared to the sort of things that Simon Armitage was doing um, on Calling the Crash Team. Like there's a particular part which well, the song "Man" is a song about a man on his deathbed, basically.
Yeah.
And there's a moment where he's described as his crumbling architecture, like a balsa wood cathedral, his buttresses and columns collapsing, and us obliged to notice. And it's exactly the kind of clever, kind of sort of simile and metaphor that's used on Calling the Crash Team. That's really effective.
Mm-hmm. No, I really enjoyed both those pieces. I never actually thought about it. I didn't think of LYR at the time, but you're absolutely right, man. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so I suppose I just left to ask you how you would rate this.
I would give it. I'm tempted to give it a 10 out of 10, man. To be honest.
I am too because I don't know. It's a really
I can't fault it at all. Sorry, mate.
sorry.
I'm saying I can't fault it at all.
Well, that's what I've written here. I've written practically flawless, and it's like I don't think. I mean, there's going to be people that listen to this and be like, can't be bothered with it at all. Definitely, but for me, yeah, I think this is brilliant.
Yeah, like I said, when we were kind of trying to arrange to record, I don't know why I've been avoiding them for so long. Like, I mean, this is yeah, this is amazing. Seems to be that I'm all about kind of spoken word stuff nowadays.
Yeah.
Because again, like with Calling the Crash Team, the LYR album, I wouldn't have given this the time of day 10, 15 years ago.
No, and I mean, I obviously, and then we saw Land is 10 years old now, so I suppose I can't say that I wouldn't have given this kind of thing the time of day 10 years ago because I did, and it's still
Yeah.
one of my favorite albums to this day. But it's not. I don't know if that is a more accessible album. It probably is. I don't think it's got a sort of concept, or if it does, I was kind of, I didn't care to kind of go that deep into it. I just like the songs.
Is it kind of like a maritime feel to it?
Yeah, and it's got a really kind of, although I think it was released in January or something, but it's got a really like autumnal kind of feel to it. It wasn't released in the autumn, but there's a song called October on it, and it's just got that kind of cold kind of, the leaves are off the trees kind of feel to it and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's a really cool album. But I think I didn't, I just took that album kind of on the face of it as being a collection of these really good songs. And this, you kind of, I suppose with age, you maybe delve into things a bit more deeply. I don't know if that's necessarily the case for everyone, but I think it probably is for me.
Maybe as we get older, we're having an existential crisis.
Yeah, possibly. So, not having known Tunng or having listened to them before, would you say you've been tongued?
I've been tongued right up the jacksie.
That's going to be used as a clip for something. Just you saying you've been tongued. Cool. Okay. All right. Well, that was. Got to remember the name of the album. Tunng presents Dead Club, and that will be going into the Scratch Cast Hall of Fame.
Cool, man.
Cut you open tenderly. There's a new sex coming soon to focus on a bath of baby clothes, a box of old dildos. 3 stars over the wood, 3 birds beneath the stars. Your eyes sparkled with mischief.
Because I firmly believe the light switch is off.
His crumbling architecture, like a balsa wood cathedral, his buttresses and columns collapsing.